Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Mindset Magic. I am here today with Sam Kukathas, who I am delighted to introduce to you. Sam has created a technology that allows people to tap into their highest states and works with leaders to help them collapse time so that they can realize their visions. He's also had a long-standing history as a philosopher, and I connected with him recently in London and recognized immediately that we were kindred spirits. So, Sam, thank you so much for being part of this conversation. I'm excited to see what directions we will move in, maybe anchoring in the idea of mindset magic to try to understand how what you do brings about this magic for people. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Srini. It's been a joy to get to know you a little bit over the last month or so, and it's a pleasure to be here.
So, Sam, there's so many different directions I'd like to take this conversation. I think the only anchoring point in my mind is I'd like, when people listen to this, to leave with at least 2 to 3 things that they think they can do to change their lives in a way that makes life easier to engage. In your work with people over the years, can you describe a little bit of some of the work that you've been engaged in and some of the changes you've seen in your own work and also in the people you've worked with?
Sure. So the work has shifted dramatically over the years from much more working in the cognitive realm. Like I started off moving from being a philosopher to a transformational coach to working in more like traditional forms of energy healing, where people would come to me with basically want to create a state of peace within their body. And then eventually things shifted into a space where really what I'd ask people is, what do they want to create? Because everything for me is really about the energy of creation. And so it would be about creating visions in their businesses. It would be about creating higher levels of aligned wealth, but also sometimes creating optimized health. And so over the last few years, it's really along that spectrum of really allowing people to call through. Like, what is it really on your heart? Like, if you are stepping in right now into your most aligned self, what are you calling forth? Often I ask people, if you were going to create a miracle today, what would that be? Right. So sometimes people who are very spiritually connected, they'll ask me, like, I want to step into the highest aligned version of me. Right. Why did I come here at all? And so that's what I'm here to guide them through into a process. And all that looks like is we're just looking at what are the beliefs and the fears and the concerns which have you not already be there right in this moment. Right. There's something in the brain which is considers there's some sort of gap between where you are in this moment and where you say you want to be. And so all I'm doing is I'm closing the gap so you're embodied in a space where you're already having experienced it already happened right now. So that's really the focal point of it. And you can utilize that same technology for anything, really. Like I've not found anything that we can't do this with. So even for things like, growing up, for instance, I would often have a lot of colds and flus and bronchitis. So I had a story that I had a bad immune system. And that story got perpetuated even when I went through my first transformational training, because I got ill at the end of the training. So I loved the training, but I got ill. So I'm not doing that again. I got sick. And then 6 months later, I went back into another version of that. And I didn't get sick. And I questioned the belief that I had a bad immune system. Like, well, no one actually ever told me that. Perhaps that's not true, right? And so I started to reevaluate that. And what I found after that is I just didn't get ill. That didn't continue to happen because something had got interrupted in terms of the belief. Now, the same is true when it comes to what I do now with frequencies. So, for instance, I have people who come to me sometimes when I'm meeting, and the person turns up, and their face is pale, and they're coughing, and they're like, "Oh, I say we could reschedule, or I can just help you now." And so, for instance, someone recently, they were in a bad state, and I just said, "Okay. All I want you to do is I want you to close your eyes and I want you to tell me what you'd like to experience instead." And from that space, they called in greater health. And then what I do is I essentially help them connect in with the version of them that's already created that through sound, through the frequency of my voice. And from that space, it's allowing them to see what their body is showing them around what's in the way of it already being actualized. And the body is so intelligent, so it's able to show, oh, here's a constriction. Oh, my throat's actually getting more seized up. And all I'll do is I'll just tune into the frequency which matches onto their experience. And so in the space of 20 minutes with that person, for instance, their face went from being pale to, fully alive. and the what was going on in the throat, all the coughings just started to dissolve, and they could feel it. They knew that somehow like there was still an idea of I'm not well in the kind of field, but there was also this experience which had shifted, whereas they felt healthy. So something had changed so dramatically. So that's a kind of an example of what's possible in the realms of certainly what I never would have believed growing up with the way I did.
So there's so many elements that you talked about that I think resonate with me in my own work. I think firstly, this idea that belief is so powerful is something that I outline in my course, Implementing the Science Behind the Law of Attraction. Because so many people feel like they don't really know about this law of attraction thing. It sounds ridiculous, but I actually think there are a lot of brain-based principles one can rely on to engage oneself differently. So let's look at a couple of things. Again, in part, I feel like I'm wanting to teach or to inform people who are listening to this, but mostly I want to shift my own mindset into just having a conversation with you. So what I'll say is that I think there's a deep resonance in me about this notion of belief, because I think we know that belief can actually change brain chemistry. We know that it can increase opioids through placebo effects. We understand this. So you feel calmer. It can increase dopamine, so you feel more rewarded. And a lot of people say, well, beliefs are not real. Well, they're not, in the sense that they're not perceptible, but they are an informational system in the brain, because what you believe is a form of information. Now, when you look at how the brain operates, I would say one of the leading theories right now is that the brain is a predictive organ. It's constantly taking in your inputs and then predicting how life is going to be. So when you believe you're going to be sick and you believe something's going to happen, it creates that reality for you based on those predictions. So the inputs that you put into this predictive algorithm matter, because if you change what you're putting in, which is like, I'm going to be great, it actually changes the outcome. Now you might be like, well, really? Well, how do we know that? Well, let's look at a couple of simple things. I was recently on another podcast, someone else's, mentioned some earlier studies by Alicia Crum, who gave people the exact same milkshake, two groups. But one group thought they had a much higher calorie count than the other. And the group that had the higher calorie count got fuller. They didn't actually have a higher calorie count, but they believed it was a higher calorie. So they got full. And when you looked at their hunger hormones, there was a decrease in ghrelin. So you're like, what? Like what they believed changed their satiety based on their physiology? It's like, yeah. And if you look at studies on placebo, open label studies where people know they're getting a placebo that may or may not have an effect for weight loss, they actually lose more weight. So you're like, how can I give you something that's not geared towards losing weight just because you believe it's going to help you? It helps you. Well, there's that and a whole lot of other studies. So I think the two of the things that really stand out for me are the idea that belief is powerful and there's a physiology behind it. And secondly, that belief is a form of input into the brain's algorithm that then changes how the brain is going to create its outputs and how you feel. But perhaps one of the things that struck me most about what you're saying is your use of voice to be able to transcend what one's identity is. So if you have a fixed sense of yourself, your biography, your autobiography is carried by a large part of your brain, but the default mode network is one of the key self networks in the brain. And when you have a constant cognitive narrative going on in your head, I am this, I am this, I am this, you can try to reframe, you can try to refocus, you can try to change your attention, you can try to analyze. But all of that is really using a lot of cognitive circuitry. One of the things you want to do is to try to bypass that, because the way you feel does not necessarily come from a set of fluent sentences. Like if I ask you on a particular day, how do you feel? If you're like, well, I feel happy. It's like, what is that? Like, what's that non-fluent sentence? And Wilfred Bion, who's a psychoanalyst, talked about the fact, and I'm sort of really, in some ways, sort of maybe condensing this too much, but I think for the purposes of explanation, he talked about the fact that human suffering is carried by what he called beta elements. And these beta elements are unexpressed, intangible things that exist within us. And that you have to have some form of alpha conversion, a conversion to some kind of symbolic thing that you can hold on to. And it strikes me that the kind of voice intervention you're talking about is something that probably taps into the brainstem, probably bypasses all the cognitive circuitry to begin to have people experience themselves beyond the meanderings of the mind. Is that your experience of how people respond to that?
For sure. And when I've talked to other neuroscientists, that's how they've also explained it to me. Because I'm someone who's very curious. So I'm always asking those who have a realm of expertise, which, because I'm always looking at how can we create a bridge between the science and the spiritual. And I feel like Joe Dispenza's done a great job of that. And it's like I see a kind of a similar pathway in terms of what I'm doing. And you can, if you're only looking at one side who has already converted, that's great. But you're going to leave aside all these people who have the possibility of seeing something else, right? Like the way that you're able to explain things and show them a different way of understanding the law of attraction. That's offering a bridge between these two things, which can create a polarity, which can create more and more separation. And what I'm looking to do is, well, if we actually see we're all connected, then we have as much possibility of believing this other side of things as we have much possibilities believing this kind of neuroscience understanding. So when I asked them, one of the technologies I've created through this app called Resonance OS, I got them to experience what's called unlock flow. And it's a 15-minute state. And basically what happens is they set an intention, they'll close their eyes, and they'll be guided through a process by me to experience that intention being fulfilled. And along the way, it'll feel like all these different emotions will come up to start to dissolve the patterns which are already there. And usually what happens is by the end of that 15 minutes, they'll be in a state of either freedom or just relaxation, or they'll have some sort of insight which wasn't present before, or if there was a problem, the problem seems to have dissolved from that space. And what I'm seeing here is that when I spoke to them, they said, okay, what do you, if you're a neuroscientist, you are a neuroscientist, how would you describe what you think is happening? And they said to me, well, what's happening, I see, is like the prefrontal cortex is getting bypassed. So it's switching off the cognitive mind, just like you're suggesting. It's hitting the emotional centers of the brain, and then it's connecting in with the autonomic nervous system, creating safety in that. And then it's also bypassing the cortical, which is a space of control. And I was like, okay, well, that makes sense why people go into this deep state of surrender and why in 15 minutes it feels to them like they've gone through a journey which might have been an hour long, because time starts to just dissolve from that space. So that's what I've noticed from the kind of the explanations. I haven't done any studies on that, but that's what I've seen.
Well, I think some of the scientific research that connects to what you're talking about, I think of a couple of different strands of research. One of them is this notion that time starts to dissolve. I think in so many interactions that are deeply meaningful, you lose the sense of time completely. And I find it interesting that one of the variables that correlates with greater health span is subjective age, which is how old you feel rather than chronological age.
Yeah.
So if you hop off the timeline of your actual existence on Earth, all of a sudden you're like wherever you want to be. And I've talked on many occasions about Ellen Langer's work, where she is actually made as 70-year-old men to live like they were 50, and she found in a brief period of time they had stronger vision, stronger hearing, and they had better muscle strength. So hopping off the timeline seems to me to be a really important variable when it comes to human health span, because people are captured by this chronology. They're captured by the story of their lives in some kind of linear pattern. There's an area that I have not gone into in other interviews, which I'd be interested to think about with you. This idea that you get older by 1 year every year. It's sort of like it ties your identity to the movement of the Earth. I've always been like, the Earth can do what it wants to do. Like, why do I have to be tied to like the identity of the Earth? Like it's doing what it wants to do around the sun. That's its business. I am interested, what are the dimensions of reality? I think from my own experiences in meditation, and sometimes on martinis, I think I have this experience that there is a dimension to being that completely transcends what this linearity is. And so, I feel when I'm in that state, there's a state of well-being that is very hard to describe. It's it's not the same state of well-being as like I won this or I finished this work. It is a completely transcendent state
Yeah.
of well-being. And it seems like you and I are both interested in what these transcendent states are. From your experience, can you speak to some of these nonlinear constructions of identity?
Yeah, for sure. Like, this is something I've been fascinated about ever since I was a philosopher. Like, I studied the Scottish philosopher David Hume, and he was making this claim in relationship to property, but it was this idea that nothing real is produced by time, but everything is produced in time. And so that always fascinated me in terms of like the mythology behind time, in terms of how we relate. Like, how do we create property rights? Well, we create it based on this relationship of time. Like, if you've had long possession, suddenly you have a right to this thing. If you just got it, you've taken it from here, present possession is not. Right? All these different rules of the imagination which create our relationship to what becomes real and then that the reality of the agreement then creates the reality of, oh, time has that function. So the biological age becomes like, oh, yes, you are, like, I'm turning 40 this month. And people might be like, oh, really? Like, you seem a lot younger than that. And it's like, okay, that's perception of what a 40-year-old looks like, is that it looks a bit maybe more haggard than I do. But, I also get to work with technology, which I've created, which basically I describe as like a facelift for the soul. So every time you're experiencing it, you feel younger. Right? Like, it feels like the wrinkles or whatever are dissolving from you. So I don't think in very linear terms generally, in life, which is probably why I come to do what I do. But when it comes to that whole relationship to time, like we've seen so many examples, like the longevity spaces where people will show like, this is what age they look like 5 or 6 years ago. And after doing all these different things, now they look 10 years younger. Now, I don't think you have to go that path or spend, $2 million on a, laboratory like Brian Johnson to be able to de-age yourself. I think there are other simpler ways, but because it's simply like, okay, what are the signals that we're sending out to our body, which are then creating the reality of how we experience our age? So, I feel really tired today. Okay, good. The body's going to give you more of that. Oh, I feel sick. Okay, great. You're going to experience that. Okay, I feel like my knees are buckling. Okay, great. You're going to probably struggle to walk. Like, whatever it is that keeps just like running in the background is going to keep creating our experience. So if we just come into like, well, what are those things which are just automatically there? If we articulate them and then we notice what it feels like within the body, we get the chance for the body to hear and respond, but also for those cells to be acknowledged. Like, I think of our cells as just like us. They want to be seen, they want to be heard, they want to be acknowledged. And, most of them haven't been. So if we can create the space for that energy to be experienced as it is, what's going to happen is the energy will transmute. Energy doesn't die, it just takes another form. And so the more the reaction on a case of like stress or tension within the body, the more the opposite side is going to go into a dissolving of, complete relaxation, transcendent states, body dissolving. Like, the amount of times people will be like, oh, I can't feel my body, not in a bad way. It's just like they're no longer connected to themselves as a physical being in that moment. They're just, the energy is just flowing through them. So that's what I see in terms of the transcendent states. And it's not limited to this kind of modality. People go through breath works with like, they suddenly don't feel like their body, or they feel so light and they're no longer identifying, because we know everything has a frequency. We know it's all a kind of electromagnetic, but yet we don't relate to ourselves in the linear reality of how we go through life as if that is actually what's going on. So these are instances where we can start to disconnect from the linearity of how we've constructed life.
Again, you take us into lots of different dimensions there, which I think I really appreciate. I think the body, I think, is a very intriguing illusion. I think I find myself drawn to people in ways that I often don't understand. It is in part because when I connect to them, I don't feel like I am my body. But what I feel is really, I'm interested to know whether you think this is an obstacle or a connection state. A lot of people will say to me, it's kind of amazing how you feel connected to people. And I do. But what's not amazing about it is that I think I start by being connected to their bodies.
Mm.
And so part of me is like, well, it's one thing to transcend your own body, but how about connecting so you can transcend the body of the other? Because sometimes when people are inspired, for example, they can be really amazed, and then they can go into this realm of physicality or sexuality.
Yeah.
Other people would say, no, when you feel that way, you connect with the energy of the other person. And then the critique of that would be, oh, you're just denying because it's so impossible. You can't like fall in love with every person's body.
Yeah.
And it's also not socially acceptable.
Sure.
Why don't you just say maybe you're defending against that, and what you're saying is you're connected to their energy, when in fact the energy is not separable from their bodies. I'm constantly in some kind of struggle around, is the body that real that it should be acknowledged? And part of me feels like, yes, it is.
Yeah.
And there's another part of me that's like, well, through your life, if you get stuck in that loop, there's nothing that comes from whatever that body attachment is. So why not just connect to something in the energy space? Do you ever feel stuck in this body energy dilemma? Do other people feel that way? And how does one move beyond that?
Sure. Like, I think, my relationship to my body has changed dramatically over the years. Like, I would say growing up, I would say low self-esteem, didn't like my body in my, probably till my at least 18. Then I would try and get to the 18, like go to the gym, try and improve the body which I had, all these kinds of things. And then as I get older, start to really love the body as it is, like, oh, I'm really grateful for it. So the relationship has changed dramatically. But to your point about what you're talking about, like if someone was experiencing what you're experiencing, I would first of all just ask them what would they want to experience instead. Like what would be the relationship that one would like to have when it's connecting with people and, having this concern about, is this an appropriate way to behave, or am I doing something right? Like it's almost like there's a kind of underlying concern. It sounds like, am I doing something right or doing something wrong, which kind of feels like it might be there for you, which is playing a part in the judgment that is either automatic from the outside or it's then automatic from you, or it's both, right? Because it's always the internal creating the external reality. So I sense that. And so then I would be like, all right, I'd invite you to go into the body itself and to locate where did that whole judgment come from? Not the now reality, because the present reality has nothing to do, well, not nothing to do, but it has a lot less to do with why you're experiencing it in this moment, right? And so if we can get to the source of where it feels like within the body, then we can start to give presence to what's already there. And sometimes it's, as you'll know very well, beyond our own lifetime that it's been formed, right? It could be a judgment. It could be an emotional state, which has been formed beyond our own timeline. And so we just want to experience it as it is. Sometimes there's an emotion which is tied to that experience. So if it's a younger child, for instance, and there was something which happened and they didn't feel safe, then what we want to do is we want to create that safety within the body so they can come back to a state of equilibrium. And from that place, a different conception can arise. But without that safety, there's going to be this uncertainty of like, did I do something wrong? Is that appropriate? And it's going to continue to run the show underneath the surface, right? Whereas if you create the space to honor that version or that part of self, it's going to start to transmute, and something else as an identity can get to be emerge, not from a space of cognitive knowing, not from a space of efforting. It will just naturally come through from the body's own intelligence showing the way.
So I'm following what you're saying, and I love what you're saying. And I'm also having this, I wrote a piece once on hamburgers and free will or something like that. And I think the reason I wrote that piece was because I think what we're talking about is so heady and so intellectual.
Yeah.
But I would also love for it to be accessible to other people. And I feel like one sort of point of contemplation as you were speaking is, how do I can imagine, I have many friends who would be like, dude, what are you guys talking about? Like,
yeah.
What are you talking about? Why are you even talking about this? Like, let's go get a drink or let's go have a meal. Like, it's like, are you guys done yet? And it's sort of like,
sure.
I appreciate their perspective, because their perspective is like, where's this going to get you in the end? Like, just make more money, have more sex, eat more good food, and keep yourself healthy. And that's what life's about. Like, why do you have to be in this other state? And for me, I think the rationale is similar to people who use drugs. Because I think the state of transcendence is a pretty amazing way of being. And I also tend to sort of connect to, I have read the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, and I don't speak any Indian languages, but for the hell of it, I guess, I started memorizing the Sanskrit and phonetically because there were English descriptions beneath them. And I was like, whoa, what is this thing doing to my head? Like, I was like, what? Like there was one, Satu Dirga Kala Narantarya Satkara Savitu Dritta Bhumi. I was like, whatever that is, it's something major because it's a sound, right? And there was another sutra that sort of what you were saying evoked the meaning of the sutra to me, which is even when you leave your body to become a celestial being, or when you merge with nature, you will still have rebirth. Meaning, there's something about you leaving your body that's still dyadic. It's not, it's dual. There's something about you merging with nature that still has a kind of duality to it. But in the essence of your voice interventions, it seems to me there's an opportunity and a path for non-duality, where the self is simply what it is. Not you're not observing the self, you don't know you're having this experience, you are simply the experience.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that? What is? It seems to me like in some ways it's like a path of yoga. I don't know all the limbs of yoga, but sort of like through knowledge or through action or through devotion, it seems like through voice should be another one of those paths of stilling the mind, so you can get to experience who you truly are.
Look, I tend to think of everything is created through a sound, right? And so frequency and attuning to the frequency, like when you're watching a program, you may choose to stay on that channel, or you may choose to change the channel because it doesn't really resonate. And so the same is true of our life, essentially. It's like, what channel are we tuned into? So let's say you want to create more wealth. And yet the way in which to create wealth is to work harder, because that is what you were taught and that's what you saw modeled. So as a consequence of that, the only way that your system is going to go about creating wealth is through working harder. And that means you could create billions and you could still be working harder than anyone out there, because your belief is something like, well, it might go away if I don't keep working hard, right? Or it's wrong not to, so I just have to keep slogging away over and over again. You'll read so many different entrepreneurs who have created significant levels of wealth, and yet they still work bloody hard. And maybe they think that's the only way, but that's something which is stored within the cells as a program, right? And that program, so some of your friends might even be running a program where it's like, hey, all you want to do is create more money. Great. But like, what are you going to do with it when you die? Like that's the game of, I need to create more in order to be happy. So then it's like some sort of reality based on the external, or I need to have more sex to be happy. It's like, yeah, like both of these things are nice, but they're not in itself going to create your peace or happiness if you don't feel that already within. Like, what are the things which are keeping you up at night? If it's like, well, I'm not having sex, I'm not creating enough money, then you want to go into wherever that's stored in the body that it's creating like the disruption, right? So this is where it becomes relevant to anyone who's like down at the pub, having your martinis with. It's like, what on earth are you spending your time thinking about? Where are you being in a space where you're like, oh, geez, I just can't get over this thing, or I've been grieving over this thing. It's like, yeah, you could go and just kind of put your head in the sand and just have another drink. And, we've all kind of probably done that at some point in time. But there's a point of a tipping point, I think, where we get to a point, it's like, is this the best way that we go? Or we just die, right? We could just continue going that pathway and we die and our consciousness doesn't evolve to a certain state. But, certainly for me, like I can remember when I was I studied at Oxford. And in 2017, my identity was based on becoming an academic, following my father's footsteps. And, the PhD I wrote, I was proud of it, but it wasn't received in the way that I expected. And so when I didn't receive the PhD, I didn't really know who I was because my identity was so tied to that. So what I would do when I was on a trip with my partner at the time, was in Scotland, is I would drink because I was so numb. I didn't know how to process the emotion. So the way I would handle it was through alcohol, right? And it was only when I really started to see that I went and found a different way. Someone supported me. It was like, hey, like you need to go do this. Like, I'm like, fuck, I've tried for my way for 2 years, hasn't worked. Let me do something else. And that was the first pathway to stop me from going from like, yeah, don't really like myself, life sucks, not sure why I'm here, to now I can see a life where it's like, what would it look like to impact all of humanity? Right? Like, they're dramatically different versions of self which have emerged. Like, shy, anxious human being who was just hoping to have half as good a career as his father, to what would it look like to impact all of humanity? Like, you can't even put those in the same sentence and make sense of it if you were coming from the original linearity of how, we think, how our brains work, or anything. So something has had to got interrupted in the default mode network, or how my brain was programmed to get to this place. So that's what I would say to the friends who are like, oh yeah, like all I want to do is make more money, have more sex. It's like, yeah, but what's the way you want to do it? Do you want to have sex in a way where you're so connected that you meet God each time through being with your partner? Or do you want to do it as a form of performance to feel better about yourself? Do you want to create more wealth in a way where it's effortless and it just falls through and it continues to create a space of fulfillment? Or do you want to create more money so that you can feel like it's, eating up, it's not going to break through a wound of I can never be enough, or, something that has to be proven by creating more money, right? Like, whatever your story is, that's what this work is for. It's to dissolve the identity which got created, which has created the cynicism in the first place, which is only creating the version of you that's currently present.
So much of what you say, I think, resonates with me. Even from, when you said the thing about cells, and cells want to have positive instructions.
Yeah.
It relates to something that's increasingly revealing itself in biological research, which is that we are fractal beings.
Yeah.
Everything that is the macroorganism there's the same kind of relation, like the organs have the same kind of expectations, the cells have the same kinds of expectations. And simply put, in the same way that a micro branch of a tree can mimic, can have all these different outgrowths from it, and mimics the larger branch, which then mimics the tree. Our cells are a fractal representation of what being is. What I'm interested in is, I have parallel lines of thought going through my mind. One is, one could become as addicted to spirituality as one is to alcohol. So what's that addiction? So that's one thought. Another thought is, I know plenty of people, especially recently, and I don't really understand what this is about, who have been deeply spiritual people who've died in their 50s. So it's been like, I don't know what that's about. There's a part of me that has always asked, what if my whole spiritual... So I'm a regular transcendental meditation practitioner. I believe in God. I'm sort of a pantheist, really. I sort of think across all religions.
Yep.
When I was young, I remember asking my mother, because I learned I was Hindu, and I was like, my friends told me I can't be Hindu because I eat beef and pork. And my mother said to me, look, the kind of Hindu you are is what I hope you'll experience God as. I don't think there's a God instructing people, you eat beef, you don't eat beef, you eat pork, you don't eat pork. You make a choice, whatever you want to eat. And I don't think God is specifically saying, if you're Christian, you can eat beef and pork, but if you're Hindu, you can't. And you like it. So why not explore the world on your own terms? And I feel like I was very lucky to have a mother who allowed me that freedom.
Yeah.
Because it allowed me to ask questions that I would ordinarily not want to ask. I have lots of people who are very close to me who are ardent and stringent vegetarians, and they have good arguments for being vegetarian. I mean, plant-based diets are associated with longer health spans.
Yeah.
They do believe that there's something cruel about killing animals. And I have often felt, firstly, I'm not a huge moralist in that, I don't like overt acts of hate and crime, but I don't feel like I'm more moral than anyone or better than anyone. I feel like whatever my own states of violence are, I channel them into hard work, competition, even in personal relationships, get into conflicts. I think all of us have this humanity we have to deal with as we're thinking about how to transcend what that state is. And in this idea of well, like, how are you living your life? I prefer to think that, I once had a conversation with Thomas Hubel, who is a spiritual teacher in Israel, who, when I first met him, I was at a meeting and there were a group of people around, and he happened to come in. I sat down, there was a chair next to me, and he happened to come in, he sat next to me, and I was like, whoa, what is with this guy? Like, he was emanating so much body heat that I felt like it was not even human. And I said almost nothing at that. And then afterwards, the person who organized the meeting called me and said, Thomas would like to talk to you. And I was like, no, he's like in a different plane. I'm not sure. I think he got the wrong guy. She goes, no, he really wants to talk to you. So we talked, and I said to him, I just want to let you know, like, I'm very committed to a worldly life, and I'm also very committed to a path of transcendence. But I'm not about to go to a monastery or that's not my path. And he said, well, what do you mean? I said, I'm somewhere between martinis and meditations. And he laughed at me and he goes, it's so funny, you're so open-minded, but there's not only one way to drink a martini. And I can see how you would drink a martini, and it would not be the way in which the world talks about it or thinks about it. And it was very interesting to me because it's the same with spirituality. Mm-hmm. In the Yoga Sutras, they point out there are people who repeatedly meditate, they pray to symbols of God, they go to, and their lives go nowhere. So I think with both of those things, it's not so much what you're doing, but I think, as you're implying, how you do it. And as you said, it's possible to have a sexual relationship with someone, but know that you're making contact with God in every instance. And the person will laugh at that and is like, yeah, whatever. Like,
sure,
that's not God, it's called orgasm. It could be like, well, maybe, but I think if you really experiment with any one thing in life, if you savor life, you will realize that there are tastes to life that are completely different. This variation in taste can be overt, like you could measure it, or it could just be in a non-numerical scale. And one of the things I'm interested in your vocal instructions is that there's a non-numerical nature to it. As much as I enjoy making science of it, and I enjoy translating it into scientific language, I think there's a place where one can actually just accept that science and art were meant to live together, that religion and science and spirituality were meant to live together. These were meant to be discourses. They were not meant to be separate fields. And one of the things I love about our conversation is that I feel like we're reigniting the notion that connection between voice and science, for example, is real. Connection between these ethereal worlds and these more physical worlds is also real. When I first heard some of your vocal utterances, I remember thinking to myself, I totally got it, and I could understand what was happening in the tonality and the face, and I was like, and then I started to think of 2 or 3 friends who would be like, what are you listening to? Like, what? Yeah. What is this guy doing? I would love, do you think in the middle of this interview, you could just demonstrate some element of that vocal tone, like now?
Absolutely. 100%. Yeah. So here's what I'd suggest. The way there's 2 contexts. One, I can just work directly with you, Srini, if you want me to, or I can create a context where it's whoever's listening, we're looking to open up something within their energetic field, where we're looking to them help to embody a state, whatever it is, which, as they listen. What would you prefer?
Yeah, I think the latter would be good for everyone.
Okay, so good. So all I invite you to do, and I invite you to do the same, Srini, is just close your eyes. And the first thing I want you to do is to have your feet on the floor, because we want to create a connection between you and the ground and the earth. Because the sounds that I'm going to start with are going to almost sound like they come from below the crust of the earth. I almost want you to start to imagine that these sounds are coming from below the crust of the earth, because we want to create more of a connection point between you and the ground. And why this is important is if you're grounded, it's much easier to bring things through in material reality. If you're just up here floating, it's more like, okay, I had a nice transcendent state, but then I can't actually ground it. So we want to be able to amplify both kinds of fields of energy. And this is just what I was intuitively guided to create from. So all I want you to do, close your eyes and start to take some breaths. This is just, again, we just want to center ourselves and allow the breath, expanding the abdomen. If it wants to expand effortlessly into the chest, allow it to rise and then effortlessly fall. We're just really creating that space for this opening to open up, to give more presence to what's already here. We're just allowing the body to really be our guide, allowing that breath to be our guide. And then what I want you to do is I want you to center your attention on an intention. And all it needs to be is something, is a state that you want to experience in this moment. It could be that you want to amplify more joy. It could be that you want to feel more free. It could be you want to feel more peaceful. It could be there's something on your mind right now and you just love to be able to dissolve that or see a pathway. Whatever it is, I just invite you to let your intelligence guide you as to what it is you want to experience. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to call in energetic support. Whether or not you believe in this or not, this is the idea that we're so connected that we're also connected with energy beyond what we already know. So we're connecting in with the energy that wants to be a support to us only always. This is the idea that we've always got different kinds of guides that are here to support us. So I'm calling in any spiritual guides, any spiritual masters, anyone who knows in the highest good of Srini, myself, and anyone who's listening now and into the future, as we call in more and more ease and flow into all of your lives, allowing you to embody in this moment a state which is consistent with this intention, and allow yourself to experience it already being here. And again, this sound's going to start from below the crust of the earth. It's going to get higher and higher and higher in resonance. Just take some breaths and just notice whatever you're feeling in your body. So for some of you, you may feel like there's something which has got more relaxed. You may feel some part of the body which feels like there's an opening. It could be more space. It could feel like a tingle. It could feel like light is coming in. And for others of you, you may feel some tension, and that's okay too. And you can always come back and listen to this and tune in to whatever it wants to show you. Wherever you are is perfect. And we just want to deepen this now. So now what I want you to do is I want you to connect in with this frequency of love. So let's see if there's a part of you specifically that feels like it wants to receive a deeper level of love in this moment. And if there is, I invite you just to put your presence wherever there's more space within the body and to call in love for this part of you. And what I'm noticing in the energetic field is it's feeling like something is starting to loosen. It's feeling like something is starting to feel more relaxed. And it could be that's just feeling more relaxed for me. It could be just feeling more relaxed for Srini, but it also could be that for you as well as you're listening, something is starting to relax. Because as we're tuning into this, as you're experiencing this, it's the idea that we are all one. We are all connected. So you can connect in through these frequencies into something which creates this space of relaxation with you. It creates this space where something starts to release or let go from within the body. And we're just going to tune in again.
Can I ask a question about that? I'm interested in
Yeah,
understanding. Firstly, thank you for doing that. It's
of course.
really, it's one thing to talk about, it's another thing to experience it.
Absolutely.
I'm interested in understanding um, when you go into that vocal state,
Yeah.
um, is it voice or is it whole bodied?
Is it
And
voice or is it whole body, did you
or is
say?
it whole bodied? Like it's coming through your voice, but it seems like
Yeah.
it's it's your whole body. And when you say that you're feeling this energetic state, this is exactly what I talk about in my course, the science
Yeah.
behind the law of attraction. I talk about the fact that people might be like, what's he talking about? He doesn't know where everybody is. It's like, well, if you think you're only here, you're definitely wrong because you can see the moon. This is one of the points I make in the course. It's just the moon is registered, it's hundreds of thousands of miles away and it's registering on your retina.
Mm,
So you are connected to things that are that far away.
for sure.
So for me, it's very believable that you could be tuning into other people's energies. There's also another study, it's a small sample size, but it was an interesting outcome that connected people in I think it was India and France, and they were connected to the internet with EEG type leads. They
Yep.
couldn't see each other, but
Yep.
in one country they had to say the words like in Spanish, like "hola," and they were able to statistically significantly predict what other people were thinking because the thoughts got transmitted long distance across countries.
Yep.
So when you say I'm feeling into the energy, are you feeling something? What are you speaking to? Like how is that
Yeah.
information coming
For
to you?
sure. Yeah. Like we all have different kinds of abilities, gifts, what have you. And this is just something which I'm sensing and I'm feeling a difference in the field, but also in my body. So what was happening towards the end as those high notes were happening, something was then dropping down into a state where it almost felt like relaxation was happening within the body. And it was like, almost feels like an exhale. And then and these sounds like the shift in the variety of these different frequencies is so dramatic. I've just tried to keep it very, very basic and very simple for the context of this. But, each time I'm getting information about what is meant to come through, right? So if we were like doing this with a kind of no holds barred approach, I would just channel through exactly what wants to emerge, not try and kind of sedate it for or pacify it for an audience. I'd be just like, all right, this is what we're going to do. It's going to go this way. It's going to go that way. It's going to sound sometimes like a tribal Indian. It's sometimes going to sound like ancient China. And then I get so much data about how it's all being experienced to the point where I can see like it's completely released. And it's just like, right. And then I'll ask someone, they'll be like, yeah, this is where I'm at. Right.
Well, when you started, what I was hearing was a chromatic scale. So
Oh,
when you
what's her?
started, I was hearing a chromatic scale. I felt like you
Yeah.
were going from like
Yeah.
C to C sharp to D sharp, and then I was like, and then it stopped being chromatic because I felt like you were moving into another plane, and so I went with you to that plane.
Yes.
I did have interrupting thoughts, which were sort of both funny, but also I appraised them differently. So one of them was like, I was like, I can't wait to play a segment of this interview for friends of mine who would be like, what is happening? And I wanted to juxtapose what we were saying about the science and what those sounds were. So we could
Yeah.
just create a segment where people would begin to at least ask the question, what if there is something in the frequency of sound that is healing? And what if, I mean, there's a lot of evidence to show that there are healing capabilities in the frequency of sound. In fact, one study looked at the frequency of love. This was in a lab. It was a lab study. They put a bunch of cells in alcohol, and they had two groups of cells, and one of them they passed what they call the frequency of love, which was 528 hertz, and they found that there was 100% protection from an oxidation capacity, or free radical capacity, when that frequency was passed through those cells, indicating that the frequency of sound could potentially have a protective effect. And subsequently, there's a whole field on sound frequencies that has emerged.
Sure.
It's cybernetics, I think, that has really shown that it can heal. I spoke to a friend of mine who is really a friend and acquaintance, but I felt very connected to her when she was telling me. She's a very practical hardware person, and she said her husband was going to go in for knee surgery, and then she found the sound frequency machine that she asked him to try out, and he didn't need to go to surgery after.
Yeah.
So the fact that sound can interact with human tissue, I think, is pretty. Most people would be able to say scientifically that is a real thing.
Yeah.
So I think if it can interact with human tissue and it can influence cells, why wouldn't you believe that you should at least explore specifically what that healing potential is?
For sure. Like it's dramatic. Like I've seen so many examples which, if I was coming from the space of just the philosopher with the cognitive mind, I would never in a million years believe it, right? It would be like reading Yogananda's The Autobiography of a Yogi, where you hear some of these stories about like overnight someone's lost like 100 pounds and, like because of something. Like, what on earth is he talking about? This sounds insane, right? But I can think of a story where someone had an issue with their neck. They couldn't move their neck, right? And all I did is, first of all, I asked them what they want to create. And then we just went in piece by piece. They're very intuitive, so they're able to sense into each part of the neck as to where it related to them in their life, whether it was ancient, whether it was a younger part of them. And we just created space for them to experience. Now, by the end of that, they went from not being able to move their neck to being able to rotate their neck. I think it was about 90% resolved within the space of about 45 minutes. And then they could sleep for the first time in weeks, right, from that space. I was talking to also chiropractors recently, and what really struck me was the idea of how the spine, each vertebrae has its own resonance. So it's kind of like the spine is like its own keyboard, is how I think of it now. So when the spine isn't fluid, when something is stuck, it's like it's calcified, essentially. And so what the correct resonance can do is decalcify it. So I've also seen times where someone experiences like a scoliosis to feeling fluidity suddenly in that spine, because it's not, stuck in the way that we've constructed it. Suddenly it's moving because it's just its own electromagnetic field that's kind of coming through. Now, again, I wouldn't have understood that coming from a cognitive realm, only through hearing and witnessing over and over again from neurologists to be saying, oh, like what you're doing is you're activating these circuits within me. I'm like, okay. And the more people who I trust in terms of their own way of articulating what's happening, the more I can then go, okay, I get it now, right? So I totally get when people have a skepticism, because I was a philosopher who was a half glass full kind of guy. So I can really meet people on that world. I was doing a podcast the other day where I spent about half an hour working with someone to create more energetic capacity. They're doing a lot of things. They've also got a bunch of kids and they're building these different businesses. And she decided she wanted to not do, create an activation for peace, but to work on her. And okay, cool, let's do that. First couple of minutes, what she was experiencing was, what are these sounds? This is weird. And then once we got past that point, something happened and it got bypassed. And all of the skepticism dissolved and a different state of being emerged. And that created a space for us to go into exactly where it was located within the body, allowing every kind of sound, no matter how odd it might sound for the average viewer, to be experienced. And by the end of it, she's just in an entirely transcendent state. And whatever was there as a concern is just no longer present. And you can even check in the body, right? Like I'll ask people about their beliefs. Like, okay, does this still feel present? Is this still located? Can you still feel any charge around it? Right? One of the easiest ways to do it was with money. I had someone who came to me, the first subconscious belief they had was money is poverty. Within an hour, money was wealth. Now, what was important about that is it opened an entirely different paradigm of vision for them, from looking to create something which was like a $4.5 million vision over the next couple of years to a $100 million vision over 5 years. I didn't put that to them. I didn't say, hey, I need you to make a bigger vision. That's not big enough. That just emerged from their own intelligence. So there's something that constantly wants to wake up from this state where it's allowing us to just activate the potential which is already there.
Yeah, I think in my own coaching practice, I have, in the last couple of years, for example, I've had a couple of people who've gone from making a few $100,000 a year to making over and above $100 million. And
incredible.
When people say, well, how do you do that? I'm like, well, I know a lot about the theory of psychology, and I know a lot about medications, and I know a lot about cognitive interventions and psychodynamic interventions. But I feel like the only thing that actually happened with those people is that they became receptive to the love in the room. And when they did, they were somehow able to connect with something in themselves that was unique. Yeah, and once they connected to themselves, they were able to come up with these slightly different strategies that allowed them to conceptualize, how to think of, similar to what you said about money as poverty versus money as wealth, how to conceptualize themselves as being wealthy. And they didn't have that cognition. They didn't even talk like that.
Yeah.
They would just come in and they would say, I'm just wondering about this thing. I don't know why this guy is doing this. And then they would do all these. In fact, all three of the people I'm thinking about were doing pretty outrageous things in their lives at the time. And all I could feel whenever they were telling me this was like, this is kind of understandable. Like, I get why you're so apparently out of control. Like, you're out of control because you have made contact with a form of energy that you don't know how to channel. And one way they channeled that was into their wealth creation through this process of love. And I feel like love, and I encourage people to be skeptical, even when I use the word love, I'm just like, no, I don't mean, I'm not like that. I'm not like, let's all love each other. Skepticism to me is a great path for any spiritual inquiry.
For sure.
Because when you ask questions, you should have some kind of answer come back to you. And if you don't have an answer, probe more. I feel like spirituality is to a certain extent a path of inquiry. But you said something at the very beginning of this interview that I think caught my attention and raised a question. Because within the various subdomains of Hinduism, Ramana Maharishi is someone who has said something a little bit different. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, which I really appreciate, prescribe a path in the evolution of consciousness, which somehow resonates with me because I understand process. But Ramana Maharishi also said something that paradoxically resonates with me, which is that there's no path. You are already there. You just have to remove the obstacles and you will access that. And in fact, I think there were some Oxford scholars who actually followed him and then ended up staying at his ashram I think it was known as the sage of Arunachala, but they stayed there because they just understood that what he was prescribing is what you were really implying earlier, which is that it's worth knowing the actual nature of the self. And voice and the meditation through voice is one way in which you can reach that. Now, what sounds like Om or Amen, there is a resonance in those frequencies that I think is across any tradition, and not just those two words, but any words. There are these words that have what I think are divine qualities to them. Do you believe that? And how would you explain that to someone who was like, what do you mean like Om and Amen has a certain...
Well, yeah, you can feel how it feels in the body, and you can feel how it feels after the toning of them, right? Like people talk about like different words have different kinds of codes which are installed within them. Different sounds have different kind of codes which are installed within them. So there's lots of more kind of research around that. Like my own process has all been intuitive, right? Like I didn't go and study sound. I grew up being someone who liked to sing, but was told like, you're not a singer, you can't sing, don't sing, right? So like there was a lot of like rewiring, I guess, that had to happen on my side to even be able to go and do this. But when this ability emerged, it emerged because something cleared in my throat, essentially. Like I already did different kinds of work with people energetically, but this was different to anything that I'd done before. And when it happened, I'll be honest, it freaked me out because one, I had people paying me well for something which was different from that. And here I was suddenly making these unusual noises, and I was worried about the integrity of that. And I had to be with that and had to sit with that until I discovered just how potent it was. Like the fastest I ever saw a shift in someone was in 15 seconds, where, I was leading a workshop around wealth, which a client had put on because he wanted people to experience what I did. And I said to her, "What do you want to create?" She's like, "I want to create $30,000. Okay, good. What's holding you back?" I can't do it. Okay. When's the first time you experienced that? And she's like, "When I was 2, I wrote a letter to a card to my father, was in the army. It said, 'Sugar is sweat.' And he said, 'No, it's not. Do it again.'" And so I get, "Okay, where do you feel that?" She felt it. It's brought through this tone. 15 seconds later, she laughed. And I'm like, "This is still present?" She's like, "No, feels free." And then we worked on the next few minutes on the creation side. So when I saw that, I was just like, okay, like whatever concerns I had about like, this is, different to what I was doing. It was just like, okay, you are ready to create this upgrade. This was cleared. And now you have a choice. You can step fully into this, or you could get concerned about how people might think of you and allow their concerns to bring through a smaller conception of who you are. And I go, okay, well, that doesn't sound like a very fun version to step into. So I believe in, the infinite potential of who we are as human beings. So I'm going to go this other way and do this thing which previously seemed weird, but now seems completely normal.
Sam Kukathas, I am so grateful for your sharing your transcendence of your own vulnerability with everyone who's listening to this. I hope that at least one major thing that you can take away from this is that you are beyond your body, that your voice is a pathway to something that will be a revelation, that many of the obstacles that you face in life don't necessarily have to be treated cognitively or analytically, but with sound and frequency. Sam, you're an inspiration to me and to humanity, and I really appreciate your taking the time to be with me and with anyone who's listening to this. Thanks so much for being here.
It's been an absolute joy and honor, Srini. Thank you.